Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to get into the sources on a figure whose career was just blindingly short.
But the influence is immeasurable.
Exactly. We're talking about James Marshall Hendrix.
It's a real study in paradox when you look at the material. Here's a man born Johnny Allen Hendrix, his father renamed him later, who completely redefined what an electric guitar could even do.
And yet, his entire period of, global revolutionary fame, it spanned just 4 years. 4 years before his death at 27.
That compression of genius is just staggering.
It is. And he is, by pretty much universal consensus in the sources, a recognized force. You see this everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Rolling Stone magazine named him the greatest guitarist of all time back in 2003. And that title, it really speaks volumes about his artistic impact.
And that impact, for so many people, was cemented by two really iconic, almost theatrical moments.
Right.
First, you have the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. That's where he famously set his guitar on fire.
An image that's just burned into rock history.
Literally. And then, of course, the second moment is his performance at Woodstock in '69, which really became the defining sound of that entire counterculture era.
What I find so remarkable, looking through the sources, is that this level of innovation came with a complete lack of formal training.
Yes, the sources are unanimous on that. He was entirely self-taught, learned everything purely by ear.
He couldn't read or write music notation.
Not at all. He taught himself everything he did. And you can see that unique approach in the iconography of his playing setup.
The famous guitar.
The famous guitar. He's a left-handed player, but he played a right-handed Fender Stratocaster.
Which he just flipped over.
Flipped it over, restrung it in reverse order.
Yeah.
And that physical manipulation, it had technical consequences that directly contributed to his unique tone.
Let's unpack that for a moment because it's so important. Most players would just buy a left-handed guitar. But by reversing a right-handed Stratocaster, the whole relationship between his hand, the strings, the pickups, it all changed.
It did. And it creates, well, three main effects that listeners often pick up on subconsciously as that Hendrix sound.
Okay, what's the first?
First is the change in string length and tension. So the longest bass string, the low E, is now wrapping around a shorter part of the headstock. This gives it a slightly looser, slinkier feel.
Right.
Meanwhile, the treble strings are now stretched over the longer side, making them a bit tighter. That little difference changes how you can bend the strings.
Okay, and the second effect?
That has to do with the bridge pickup. It's slanted on a Strat. It usually slopes up toward the bass strings on a right-handed guitar to give them more brightness.
So when you flip it,
The slant is reversed. The higher frequencies on the treble strings, the B and high E, are now picked up closer to the neck, which gives them a warmer, rounder tone. And the bass strings get a sharper, more defined attack near the bridge. It's a complete tonal flip.
his signature sound wasn't just distortion then. It was a physical consequence of him fighting the instrument's design.
Exactly. And the third effect is the controls. The volume and tone knobs were now on the top horn of the guitar, right up near his chin,
Which meant he could get to them easily.
constantly. He could manipulate them with his wrist and forearm while he was playing, allowing for these rapid, momentary tone and volume swells that other players just couldn't access in the middle of a song.
Our mission in this discussion is to follow that path of unique self-expression from, a very challenging childhood and his necessity-driven training to that compressed period of global superstardom.
And then, inevitably, we have to explore the very complex, often contested facts surrounding his passing.
Let's start at the very beginning of the biography. James Marshall Hendrix was born in Seattle, November 27, 1942. The sources really paint a clear picture of his early life. It was defined by instability.
A profound instability. His childhood just lacked any typical foundation. The sources point to serious financial hardship. He grew up with very little money and a real lack of consistent parental attention.
His parents divorced when he was 9.
And then, tragically, his mother passed away when he was only 16. These were incredibly challenging beginnings that basically forced him into a very early independence.
And it's from that struggle, that necessity for self-reliance, that the musician first emerges.
Absolutely.
The anecdote about his first instrument just perfectly encapsulates that self-taught genius we were talking about. We read that at age 14, he was desperate for a guitar but couldn't afford one.
So he found a broken broomstick. It was discarded, had a single string still attached.
The ability to make music out of literally nothing, it's astounding.
It is. The sources confirm he somehow managed to tune that single string and actually play several basic tunes on it. That shows his innate connection to sound long before he had any proper equipment.
It wasn't too long before he got a small upgrade. Around 15, he managed to get a real acoustic guitar for just $5.
From a friend of his father's.
Yeah.
But the crucial transition, the move to an electric instrument that came from his father, Al Hendrix, who bought him a white Supro Ozark.
But even with a real electric guitar, the limitations were still there.
Right. He was learning his basic tunes, his chords, and most importantly, his improvisation, purely through observation. He'd watch prominent artists, people like Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley, play live.
And what's key to remember is that a lot of this early playing was done without an amplifier.
Which means he was focused entirely on technique, on finger dexterity, on projection. He was building his signature sound from raw instinct just by mimicking the movements he saw on stage.
That mix of learning styles meant his early inspirations were pretty diverse. He was bridging traditional R&B with the emerging rock and roll scene.
He was, and he was a genuine fan of Elvis Presley.
He saw him live.
Yes, he saw Presley perform at Sick Stadium in 1957, and that visual just left a lasting impression. He even drew a color picture of Elvis with an acoustic guitar.
And that's now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It is a wonderful piece of early memorabilia, and the sources show that admiration continued. Years later, in Paris in 1968, he reportedly watched the movie King Creole, just trying to find inspiration for song structures.
But the deep foundation, the real technical bedrock of his style, that was firmly rooted in the blues.
Oh, absolutely. We know he admired famous blues musicians like Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Lightning Hopkins. He spent years on the Chitlin circuit backing up major R&B acts.
And that was his real education.
It was. Now, the sources do mention his contentious working relationship with Little Richard.
Right. Richard reportedly disliked Hendrix's flamboyant clothes, his chronic lateness,
And his tendency to draw attention to himself on stage by showing off. But those experiences, they taught him about stage presence and the demands of performance.
Now, if we move to his formal education, the sources highlight these significant discrepancies about why he didn't graduate from Garfield High School. The fact that he didn't finish is clear.
But why he didn't finish is highly contested, even by Hendrix himself.
This is where his biography starts to feel like he was actively trying to build his own narrative.
Completely. Over the years, he gave reporters 3 distinct, conflicting accounts for why he left school.
What was the first one?
The first claim was socially charged. He said he failed because people were racist and didn't favor him because he was black.
And the second claim was more internal, I guess, more administrative.
Exactly. Poor grades and just general disorganization meant he couldn't keep up with the curriculum.
And the third was the most dramatic.
That he was simply thrown out for being rude to a teacher.
So if you look at all the source material together, what's the most likely truth?
The truth is likely a combination of poor grades and the fact that his musical aspirations were just all-consuming. But the contradiction itself is what's so interesting.
The fact that there are 3 different stories.
Yes. 3 totally different self-reported explanations. It tells us he was actively curating the story of his youth, choosing whichever version of failure was most, palatable or resonant depending on who he was talking to.
That youthful chaos eventually led to a major legal crisis.
It did. Hendrix ran into trouble with the law, specifically for stealing cars. Not once, but twice. And this resulted in a life-altering ultimatum.
The choice was stark. 2 years in prison or join the U.S. Army.
And he chose the Army. He enlisted on May 31st, 1961.
His military career was brief, though.
Lasted exactly 1 year, and according to his officers' reports, it was pretty disastrous. They noted he was frequently caught sleeping on duty and couldn't even seem to handle a gun competently. His focus was just completely elsewhere.
There's a very telling quote from one of his officers who stated that his mind apparently cannot function while performing duties and thinking about his guitar.
It sounds like a man just completely incapable of conforming to military discipline because his creative drive was just overwhelming everything else.
But that forced service gave him the single most crucial connection of his early career.
It did. While he was based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, he met a fellow soldier and bass player named Billy Cox.
And they formed a group.
A small group, the King Casuals. And this meeting gave him a bandmate, a partner, who really understood his musical goals.
The military brass, seeing that he was just unsuitable, recommended his departure on May 31st, 1962, after just 1 year.
He agreed readily. But when he spoke about it later publicly, he offered another, colorful explanation.
Right, the parachute story.
He claimed he was let go after breaking his ankle on his 26th parachute jump.
He also voiced his dislike for the Army in overseas interviews.
Yes, with Melody Maker in 67 and 69. He was very clear about it. But again, you see that strategic control of his own narrative based on geography.
When he was interviewed in the U.S., he would usually avoid the topic.
Completely. He'd just confirm he was stationed at Fort Campbell and move on. He seemed to want to minimize any potentially damaging image associated with his early legal troubles or disciplinary issues on home soil.
So after leaving the Army, he and Billy Cox immediately dedicated themselves to music.
They did. They moved to Clarksville, Tennessee, and focused on playing as the King Casuals in these small, often gritty bars for almost no money.
This was the pure grind.
It was. And that grind quickly led them to the major musical hub of Nashville. They kept playing blues-style songs. But this period was invaluable because it gave him crucial studio experience.
He logged his first studio performance in November 1962.
And while the financial rewards were, negligible, the experience he gained playing rhythm, lead, and eventually taking on vocals in all these different bands was his true education. He was learning timing, recording techniques.
The whole infrastructure of the music business on the fly.
He was a sponge. He played in various backing bands for artists on the Chitlin circuit. This was the proving ground. And eventually he moved northward, arriving in New York City, and by January 1964, he had settled in Harlem.
And in Harlem, the cycle continued, playing bars and clubs just to survive.
But he did achieve a significant early milestone there. He won first prize in an amateur guitar contest at the Apollo Theater.
Which would have been a huge validation.
A massive confirmation that his talent was rising above the noise of that local scene.
So by 1966, he felt confident enough to formalize his own group.
Yes, Jimmy James and the Blues Flames. They played a residency at places like Café Wa in Greenwich Village, really developing their sound. The sources note he recruited local musicians, including one 15-year-old boy named Randy, who was just awed by his abilities.
And the story of his breakthrough is just this incredible piece of rock and roll serendipity.
It really is. During this time, he met and befriended Linda Keith.
The girlfriend of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards.
Exactly. And she saw his raw, undeniable talent immediately. She essentially became his champion.
She's the one who introduced him to Chess Chandler,
The manager for the successful British band The Animals. Chandler was looking for new talent, but he gave Hendrix a very specific test.
a contract requirement.
Right. It was simple but crucial. Chandler asked him to write a rock version of the traditional folk song Hey Joe. This gave Hendrix a clear commercial mandate.
And when Hendrix delivered, Chandler was convinced.
He brought him straight to London to sign a contract. And this was the pivot point. In London, away from the familiar structures of American R&B, he was free to completely redefine himself as a global rock star.
The formation of the new group was immediate,
And that band was christened the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
with Mitchell on drums and Noel Redding on bass.
And the sources are precise that the name, the Experience, was actually chosen by their business manager, Mike Jeffrey. It wasn't Hendrix's idea, but the template for that iconic power trio was complete.
So now we move into the core of his recorded legacy. 3 studio albums released in just over a year that fundamentally altered the sound of popular music. We really need to get into the granular detail here.
This is where the technical innovation just exploded.
Let's start with the debut, Are You Experienced, from 1967.
It was an immediate phenomenon upon its release in May of '67. It reached number 2 on the charts in the UK, which established their presence before they had even really cracked the American market.
The sound of it was a total shockwave. It introduced the world to his pioneering use of electronic effects.
The fuzz phase pedal for that heavy distortion, but most importantly, the controlled use of feedback.
Which before Hendrix was just considered noise.
Exactly. It was a mistake engineers tried to eliminate. But Hendrix treated feedback as a musical element, a sustained note you could manipulate by physically moving around the amplifier.
Creating these long, soaring, almost vocal tones.
It was revolutionary.
Yeah.
It completely changed the perceived limitations of the electric guitar.
And the sources confirm the instant validation he got from the British music elite. Before they crossed to America, they played their last London concert on June 4th, 1967.
And the list of musicians in that audience was just astonishing.
Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Eric Clapton.
Jack Bruce, Brian Epstein. It was an instant acceptance by the British rock aristocracy.
I mean, think about that. Clapton, who was arguably the king of British guitarists at the time, was instantly awed.
And maybe even a little intimidated. Clapton later admitted he realized that what he thought was groundbreaking was about to be redefined entirely by this newcomer.
And the critical praise has only intensified over time. VH1 ranked it the 5th greatest album of all time in 2001.
And Rolling Stone placed it at number 15 on their list in 2003. It's considered a timeless rock blueprint.
The key tracks are crucial for understanding its impact. Foxy Lady, at 3 minutes and 22 seconds, that established his blues rock swagger.
Then you have Manic Depression, which is 346, showing his rapid-fire chord changes and complex rhythms, and Red House, a pure blues track showing his roots.
And of course, the essential chart hits: Fire, Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary.
Purple Haze is particularly interesting. The lyrics are so surreal and psychedelic, but the sound driven by that massive, overblown distortion is pure hard rock. He was defining the genre before it even had a name.
The brevity of tracks like Fire, just 2 minutes and 47 seconds, it just demonstrates the immediate explosive energy of that trio.
It was raw, energetic, and completely unlike the orchestral arrangements that some of their peers, like the Beatles, were exploring. This debut was a lightning bolt.
The pressure was immense to deliver a follow-up quickly, an Axis. Bold as Love arrived later that same year.
It did. And commercially, it maintained the success. It reached number 3 in the US and number 5 in the UK.
Technically, though, what was the big difference?
The most important distinction was a deliberate adjustment to the sonic landscape. For this album, Hendrix tuned his guitar down a semitone from standard E tuning to E-flat.
And that minor physical shift.
It gave the entire album a slightly deeper, more resonant, and arguably more melancholic tonality compared to the raw power of the debut.
Compositionally, he was expanding, moving beyond just blues rock toward more melodic and psychedelic themes.
Which you can hear in the title. And it included so many definitive tracks, most notably Little Wing.
Little Wing is a masterpiece of dynamic, clean playing mixed with those volume swells we talked about.
Its influence is maybe more widespread than any other track from the album. It's been covered by everyone: Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, Metallica, Pearl Jam. They all recognized its delicate genius.
And this is where the production story gets legendary.
And nearly tragic. The album almost didn't get sold because of a near disaster in the studio.
Hendrix reportedly lost the master tape of side 1
in the back of a London taxi after a night out.
It must have been absolute panic for the production team.
It was. Hendrix, Chas Chandler, and the engineer Eddie Kramer had to scramble into the studio to remix all the missing songs. They had to do in a single frenzied night what had taken weeks of careful work before.
I read about the intense struggle to reproduce the complex spatial effects and sound textures, especially on If 6 Was 9.
Which is 5 minutes and 32 seconds long. The entire launch of the album was hanging in the balance.
And the day was saved by pure luck.
And foresight. Their bassist, Noel Redding, happened to have a rough copy of the missing tracks on a safety tape, which allowed them to rebuild the mix.
But even after all that, Hendrix was reportedly very disappointed.
He was. He felt the album was finished too quickly and that a better result could have been achieved with more time and, less chaos.
Despite the rush, it showcases incredible songwriting depth. The title track, Bold as Love, which is over 4 minutes long, features this beautiful sweeping phase effect.
One of the earliest uses of that kind of phasing on a rock record. It showed the world that Hendrix wasn't just a sonic vandal. He was a nuanced composer.
So that brings us to the third and final album, Electric Ladyland, completed in 1968.
And this was the sound of an artist demanding and receiving total creative freedom. It was his largest statement, a double album spread across 2 LPs.
The recording process itself reflected the rising tension and chaos around Hendrix at the time.
It really did. Chas Chandler, the manager who brought him to London, he grew tired of Hendrix's unpredictable working hours, his expensive studio habits, his demand for absolute artistic control.
And Chandler left the project.
He did. And Noel Redding, the bassist, also soon departed. He found it difficult to cope with Hendrix's sprawling experimental sessions.
With Chandler gone, Hendrix took full control. He effectively produced the album himself with engineer Eddie Kramer.
And he radically changed his musical approach. He moved away from that tight power trio format. He used a vast array of session musicians and instruments, flutes, organs, trombones, alongside heavy distortion and the newly acquired Octavia pedal,
which duplicated his tone an octave higher. He was explicitly trying to achieve strange sounds and textures that went beyond anything previously attempted in rock.
And that approach paid off commercially. This was his apex. Electric Ladyland reached number 1 in the US and number 6 in the UK.
Critically, it has stood the test of time. Ranked the 72nd best album by VH1 and 54th greatest by Rolling Stones magazine. This album legitimized the idea that studio experimentation was integral to the composition.
And the double album format finally gave him the space to stretch out. You see track lengths that were truly epic for a rock record back then.
Voodoo Chili is a perfect example. It's an immense 15 minutes long.
A full-on blues jam featuring Steve Winwood from Traffic on Oregon. And then there's the incredible sonic journey of 1983, A Merman I Should Turn to Be.
Which runs for 13 minutes and 39 seconds. These weren't just long songs, they were cinematic soundscapes.
Using multi-tracking, backwards tapes, spatial effects, he was building entirely new musical worlds.
And despite all that experimentation, the album also contained his most famous singles, Crosstown Traffic.
The definitive cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower, a version Dylan himself said was superior to his own.
And the heavy blues rocker, Voodoo Child, Slight Return. This trio of albums, compressed into barely 18 months of recording, remains the greatest testament to his genius.
Absolutely.
So if that trio of albums defined his recorded sound, the Woodstock Festival defined his public presence and, well, his political interpretation.
Yes, he was set to play at the legendary event on August 18th, 1969.
But logistically, his appearance was a disaster from the start.
A complete disaster. He was the headliner, scheduled to close the festival on Sunday evening. But after 3 days of massive scheduling, chaos, delays, and just organizational failures.
He didn't actually take the stage until Monday morning.
Exactly. And this meant a catastrophic reduction in the audience. The original crowd was estimated at 500,000 people, but by the time the sun came up on Monday and he finally plugged in,
only about 180,000 weary attendees remained.
many people who came specifically to see him had already left the muddy field.
And compounding those logistical issues, Hendrix had basically abandoned the experience. He was playing with this massive, unwieldy new group.
Gypsy Sun and Rainbows, or later, Band of Gypsies.
Yeah.
And the 2-hour performance he delivered was widely described by critics and in some sources as, well, awful.
Why was it considered so poor?
His enlarged band, which sometimes had 7 musicians, just had not practiced enough. They struggled significantly to keep pace with his rapid, complex guitar playing and his improvisational detours.
So the music was just disjointed.
It was. The rhythm section faltered often. But despite the band's struggles, that set produced one of the most defining, interpreted, and analyzed moments in American musical history.
His instrumental version of the Star-Spangled Banner.
He compensated for the poor band performance by channeling all the chaotic energy of that moment directly into the music. He performed the anthem using intense, heavy distortion.
And incorporating sound effects he created with his whammy bar and volume knob.
Crucially, the sounds he produced weren't just musical notes. They were sonic recreations of war. He used distortion to mimic machine guns, dive bombers, the screams of explosions, all channeled directly through his guitar.
So in the context of the Vietnam War and the massive cultural anxiety of the late 60s, this performance was instantly read as an intense political statement.
Oh, immediately. Many people interpreted the sound as overtly anti-American, viewing it as a symbolic mockery of the country and the national anthem.
Turning a patriotic symbol into a soundtrack of destruction.
But we have to prioritize the artist's stated intent here, which directly contradicted that reading.
Right. Hendrix himself refuted the political interpretation in a later interview.
He stated explicitly that he did not intend for his performance to be a political statement. He insisted he was just presenting another version of the national anthem, filtered through his unique sonic palette.
And that dichotomy is fundamental to understanding his legacy. The friction between an artist's pure desire for self-expression and the overwhelming social and political context that naturally imposes immense meaning onto their work.
Regardless of intent, his work became a mirror for the era, even if he didn't set out to polish the glass.
Let's move now to his personal presentation and the tragic end of his story. Jimi Hendrix was a true cultural pioneer in his look, just as much as he was in his sound.
His visual aesthetic evolved so rapidly alongside his music. Early on, he had a Bob Dylan-style haircut, but he quickly moved toward highly adorned close scarves, large rings, distinctive brooches,
Creating a very theatrical presence.
and his stage clothing became increasingly flamboyant as the psychedelic era peaked. He went from a dark suit and silk shirt in his early London days to these spectacularly bright blue or red velvet suits and dramatically flared trousers.
Often with intricate embroidery and military-style braiding.
He was a master of the stage accessory. In 1967, he adopted a distinctive cowboy-style hat he called the Westerner. By 68, he started tying colorful scarves and ribbons to his legs and arms.
Making his movements even more fluid and visually dynamic on stage.
And his famous bandana became probably his most iconic, recognizable piece of clothing. He started wearing it prominently in 1969. The value of this memorabilia today speaks to his lasting fame. One of his bandanas sold at auction for $19,500.
Wow.
Demonstrates its cultural significance.
It's essential then to also discuss the reality of his life and the culture of the late 1960s, which includes substance use.
Yes, it was pervasive. The sources confirm he was widely associated with the use of psychedelic drugs, especially LSD, as well as regular consumption of marijuana and alcohol.
And the sources specifically highlight that his consumption of alcohol was problematic.
It had a clearly negative impact on his behavior. There are multiple accounts noting that when he was drunk, he would frequently become angry and, at times, violent.
However, when discussing illicit substances, the sources provide a really crucial factual correction regarding the common myth of heroin use.
Yes, this is important. No one knows definitively if he ever took heroin. But furthermore, the official autopsy performed after his death found no traces of heroin in his body.
And no needle marks.
This evidence directly contradicts the pervasive rumors that surrounded his death for years.
This brings us to the most somber and complex part of our discussion. On September 18, 1970, James Marshall Hendrix died at the tragically young age of 27.
He was found unresponsive in a basement apartment at the Samarkand Hotel in London.
It's impossible to reflect on the magnitude of his talent without feeling just immense sadness for the promise that was lost so abruptly.
It is. And the official finding, the most medically likely explanation for his passing, is that it was an accidental death.
The sources state that he took too many Vesperach sleeping pills, a very powerful German barbiturate, while he was heavily intoxicated with alcohol.
And that combination meant he fell into an extremely deep unconsciousness. He was rendered unable to wake up or respond. He subsequently vomited and choked because he couldn't regain consciousness to clear his airway.
However, the immediate circumstances and the timeline surrounding his death remain profoundly contested.
Yes, which is why various theories persist. The sources reveal major contradictions concerning the immediate hours before his death was pronounced.
For instance, we have the account of his girlfriend at the time, Monica Danneman, who was present. She later claimed that he was still alive and breathing when she placed him in the ambulance.
Yet, the official hospital records directly contradict that statement. The records indicated that Hendrix had been dead for some time before his arrival at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital.
And that discrepancy in the timeline alive at the scene versus dead on arrival, it fueled decades of speculation.
It did. And if we explore the theories that emerged from these contradictions, the first one focuses on potential medical negligence.
Right. Some sources suggest that the paramedics didn't properly secure his head while he was unconscious.
And in that state, failing to keep his airway clear may have been a contributing factor to the choking.
Theory 2 stems from a very painful private detail.
A sad, melancholic poem written by Hendrix was discovered in his apartment around the time of his death. And while it wasn't a direct note, its somber tone led some observers to speculate that he might have committed suicide.
A theory supported by reports of his erratic behavior in his final days.
And finally, there's the third theory, which is the darkest and most persistent rumor. Speculation that he may have been murdered by his manager, Mike Jeffrey.
And this arose from Jeffrey's known criminal connections.
And the fact that Hendrix was actively trying to break his contract with Jeffrey just before he died. Now, the police found no evidence to substantiate this claim, but the atmosphere of chaos and suspicion around his passing kept that theory alive.
So when you synthesize all the evidence, what remains the most likely conclusion?
A tragic accident of acute consumption. The mixture of excessive sleeping pills and alcohol that resulted in an inability to protect his own airway.
Even his physical memorial had a degree of complication.
It did. He was buried in his hometown area at Greenwood Memorial Park in Renton, Washington on October 1st, 1970.
And initially, his headstone was incorrect.
The carving showed him playing a Stratocaster that was right-handed, ignoring the fundamental fact that he was a left-handed player who used a reversed right-handed guitar. A small detail, but a major visual error.
And because of the sheer volume of fans visiting the site.
The crowds were so large, there was concern they might damage other graves. So his father, Al Hendrix, decided to build a separate, more substantial memorial.
And this new monument is a striking piece of architecture.
It is. A massive, polished granite dome structure, held up by 3 pillars. He's interred underneath it, providing a dedicated place for fans to visit. His distinct autograph is inscribed at the foot of each pillar.
And a brass sundial sits at the top, a permanent symbol of a life cut short.
And his physical presence remains in Seattle in another way. A permanent memorial statue of Hendrix, capturing him mid-performance, stands at the corner of Broadway and Pine.
ensuring his image and revolutionary spirit remain rooted in his hometown.
If we look back at this intense biography, the core insight for you is the sheer intensity and efficiency of his output. From the moment the Experience debuted their first album to his death, only 4 years passed.
Just 4 years.
In that exceptionally compressed window, he didn't just play the electric guitar. He rewrote the manual, revolutionized studio production, and earned the title of greatest guitarist of all time.
And the final reflective thought we'd leave you with connects back to that moment at Woodstock. While his musical influence is, undisputed, consider the lasting tension between the artist's stated intent, his desire for the Star-Spangled Banner performance to be just another version of the national anthem, and the intense political and social interpretations that the world inevitably imposed on his art.
That friction between pure artistic expression and cultural consequence remains perhaps the most complex and lasting question surrounding his legacy.
The music was so powerful that it couldn't exist outside of the charged atmosphere of the late 1960s.
And that is the testament to his unique voice.
Thanks for listening.